tech and tea. It's very wonderful to have you all here with us today. Please give us a few minutes for people to join. Thank you. Hi, Anna. Sorry, that was a mistake. I was just giving you talking privileges for later. Sorry.
Okay. You can make it slightly bigger. It's too small. We can't see the program in full.
Is that
Yeah,
better?
much better. Yeah, much. Hi, Annie, please move me to the panelists.
Sure, Beauty, are you able to do so?
I get in. I think some people are joining on the Teams link. I keep seeing people on the Teams link.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. I will go in and let them know once.
Yeah, I saw people on the Teams link as well. Yeah, a lot of people are going to the Teams link. We should have used this link. We should have in the calendar instead of doing the Teams meeting. Fiona. Hi, Tafatswa.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Anna, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Just giving it one more minute to, we're just waiting for Prof. Bakama from the AU to join. I'm just resending him the link. Hey, Prof.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, thanks. Thanks for joining. I'm just resharing the agenda. Can everyone see the agenda okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Technology and Transitional Justice launch. My name is Kathy Ann Potgieter. I'm a legal officer at CSVR, and I'm going to be your moderator for the day. I would like to welcome the speakers today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Andrew Songa, Ms. Fiona Asuke, Mr. Usani Odom, and Ms. Siren Do, who will be our panelists today and presenting the report. I'm going to hand over to Ms. Ana Moyo Capeta to present the opening remarks.
Thank you, Annie. A very
Sorry,
good
Anna.
morning.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Just for the housekeeping, my apologies. With the interpretation is available. If you just see on your Zoom at the bottom, there is a button for more. If you press on more, you see interpretation available. Kindly select the language that you would be using in this webinar. And please, may I ask all the speakers to kindly put on their videos when they are speaking and when the panel is active. Thank you very much. Sorry, Anna, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annie. A very good morning to everyone. And let me start by observing all protocols to all our colleagues in the civil society sector, our distinguished guests, our funders in the room, our partners in the Initiative for Transitional Justice in Africa Consortium, my colleagues from CSVR, other stakeholders from different sectors that we work with as partners, as collaborators. I wish all of us a very good morning. It is my privilege this morning to welcome all of us to this important convening on technology and transitional justice in Africa, particularly to launch a report that we have developed together as the Initiative for Transitional Justice in Africa, led by CSVR. Basically, the meeting today is to start a conversation that could be more timely and more necessary around the uses of technology for the work of transitional justice and transformative peace in Africa, but really also looking at some of the dangers, some of the opportunities, some of the emerging issues, the challenges, and how we can harness technology to better the services, the interventions, and even the shaping of the discourse on transitional justice on the continent. I think we can all agree that African societies continue to grapple with legacies of mass violations, political violence, inequality, and exclusion. At the same time, our continent experiences an unprecedented digital transformation. As we were drafting this report that we will be engaging today, it became clear that these two realities are no longer separate when we are looking at where we are on the continent, how we are grappling with the realities of conflict, recurrence of conflict, protracted conflict, and so forth. And the growth of the growth of use of technology, and basically the broader digital transformation on the continent. Transitional justice and technology, therefore, are now intersecting forces that are at the helm of shaping Africa's future, both holding immense promise and posing serious risks that, if not carefully stewarded, could actually present more harm than good on the continent. In a quest to try and balance the harms, the opportunities, as well as the advancement of technology for the betterment of transitional justice, this Technology and Transitional Justice in Africa report really comes as one of the resources that will guide us in how we can positively harness technology for the betterment of interventions, the betterment of participation, and the betterment of transitional justice offerings on the continent. One of the key trends that we have highlighted in the report is the dual role of technology, where on the one hand, there are digital tools that have been transformed, how truth is documented. At the same time, we have the data-driven, participatory, efficient, and accessible methodologies on how we can enhance participation and broaden participation, particularly for those previously hard to reach participants and beneficiaries of transitional justice. We have also looked around how we can ensure that some of what we have done on the continent can be replicated and deepened to ensure better offerings of transitional justice in the work that we are doing in the countries that are currently implementing transitional justice on the African continent. We are also grappling with digital exclusion on the continent, the gendered digital violence, disinformation campaigns, cyber surveillance, data breaches, and the misuse of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, risk entrenching the very inequalities and violations that transitional justice seeks to redress. Our report, therefore, really seeks to deal with these issues at the same time highlighting and elevating the benefits of technology and using technology for the betterment of transitional justice. The experts are here in the room who will really delve deeper into some of these paradoxes, some of these opposing rather, or the polar ideas and the polar reflections and insights into technology and transitional justice. Mine really is to welcome all of us to this forum, to the launch of this report, and to the engagements, the reflections that we are all going to have, basically looking at the benefits against the harms posed by technology and how we can harness the use of technology for transitional justice, for transformative peace in Africa, and for the betterment of participation and the betterment of beneficiaries of some of these transformative processes that seek to address and redress harm on the continent. I invite, therefore, in this meeting today, robust discussions, reflections, the sharing of insights, lessons learned, as well as some of the recommendations on how we can better transitional justice through technology, how we can do away with the harmful components, the dangerous, risky components of technology, at the same time maximizing the good and the best of it for the betterment of transitional justice on the continent. I now open basically this meeting and invite all of us to continue engaging even after this meeting. And I also would like to give thanks to our panelists who are really experts in the field, who are better versed than me on the nuances around technology and transitional justice on the continent, who will then unpack the report, unpack some of what the report presents, unpack the trends, and also make recommendations on how we can harness technology for transitional justice on the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, our Executive Director of CSVR, for grounding this report within CSVR's broader commitment to transitional justice, accountability, and social transformation. Next, I invite Mr. Tafatswa Christmas, the Program Coordinator for the ITJA at the ICTJ, to reflect on the report's relevance to ITJ's objectives and regional work. Thank you, Mr. Christmas.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Anna, for opening this launch and also for inviting us to also speak. I just have a few words to share in solidarity with CSVR as we launch this particular report. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a pleasure to speak on behalf of the International Center for Transitional Justice, which serves as the consortium lead for the Initiative for Transitional Justice in Africa, which is a consortium comprised of 3 civil society organizations, including the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, CSVR, the African Transitional Justice Legacy Fund, ATGLF. We have been entrusted by the African Union and the European Union to implement this initiative with the aim of promoting and supporting the domestication and implementation of the African Union Transitional Justice Policy across the continent. Today, we have gathered to witness the official launch of the groundbreaking report on technology and transitional justice in Africa. This report is commissioned and compiled by CSVR, one of the consortium partners under the ITJA. It is aimed at consolidating knowledge generation and represents the culmination of rigorous research aimed at strengthening knowledge base and enriching policy and practice on transitional justice in Africa. The timing of this report could not be more significant. It comes at a time when we are living in an era in which technological advancement, particularly in artificial intelligence, digital platforms, and multimedia tools, are profoundly reshaping society as we know it. It's clearly presented in the report when you get a chance to read through it. These technologies hold tremendous promise for transitional justice in Africa. They can help investigate and document violations more effectively. They can help to preserve memory more securely, amplify the voices of victims, and expand access to justice, national justice process beyond traditional limitations of distance and geography. Yet, as this report so thoughtfully reminds us, technology is not neutral. The same tools that can empower can also exclude. The same innovations that can illuminate truth can also distort it. And persistent digital divides and also perpetuate digital divides, which risks further marginalizing those who are already living on the margins. While the manipulation and weaponization of information can also be used to undermine trust, truth, and accountability. This report, therefore, does not only map opportunities in terms of how we can use technology in transitional justice, it also challenges us to reflect critically on our responsibilities. It calls on all of us as practitioners, policymakers, researchers, and partners to ensure that technology is harnessed in a way that upholds the core principles that should guide and define transitional justice in Africa, that is victim-centeredness, inclusivity, and the fight against impunity as articulated in the African Union Transitional Justice Policy. This is precisely what makes this report both timely and seminal. It is therefore befitting to congratulate the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, CSVR, for yet another important contribution to the growing body of knowledge on transitional justice in Africa. Please allow me to express our sincere appreciation to the CSVR team, to the entire CSVR team, ably led by Madam Anna Moyo, and to the lead researcher, Mr. Andrew Songa, for their dedication, intellectual leadership, and commitment in producing this important report. In this research under the Initiative for Transitional Justice in Africa, and to the African Union for its continued leadership, guidance, and partnership in advancing transitional justice across the continent. Colleagues, as we engage with this report today, I encourage all of us to reflect not only on what technology can do, but also on what it should do. without losing sight of why our work matters. Technology is an instrument in the service of transitional justice, not a substitute for our commitment to deliver justice, truth, reparations, and guarantees of non-recurrence to victims and societies affected by it. It must amplify the voices of victims, not overshadow them. It must strengthen our collective pursuit of truth, accountability, and reconciliation. I wish you all fruitful and stimulating deliberations as we reflect on this report, and I hope that the insights and recommendations presented in the report will inform our work and inspire us to harness technology responsibly and effectively in advancing transitional justice in Africa. As we do so, let us be reminded that technological innovations in transitional justice must be context-specific and must be responsive to the needs and lived experiences of men, women, girls, and boys affected by violations, whose names and identities must never be reduced to anonymous entries in the vast repositories of big data. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tafadzwa, particularly for highlighting how this research contributes to the roles that technology can play, the important role that technology can play in transitional justice mechanisms. Finally, I invite Professor Eugene Bakama-Bope, who is the Transitional Justice Specialist at the African Union Commission, to share reflections from the African Union perspective. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you, Kati Ann, for giving me the floor. I will deliver this opening remark on behalf of the TJ unit. Distinguished representative of the EU, esteemed partner from ICTJ, CSVR, and ICGLF, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. It is both an honor and a privilege to join you today for the launch of the Technology and Transitional Justice Report. On behalf of the African Union Commission, especially the Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, I extend a warm welcome to each of you. Today's gathering is more than a ceremonial event. It marks an important moment of reflection and, I will say, transition in how we think about transitional justice in Africa. Let me begin by congratulating the Initiative for Transitional Justice in Africa, implemented through the partnership of ICTJ, CSVR, and ITJLF, with the support of the European Union. This report represents not only research excellence, but strategic foresight. It challenges us to rethink how transitional justice must evolve in an increasingly digital world. When the AU adopted the transitional justice policy, our primary focus was clear: to provide normative clarity, strengthen institutional frameworks, and support member states in addressing legacies of conflict and injustice. At the time, technology was not framed as a central pillar of implementation. Even the first roadmap for 2020 to 2024 did not explicitly articulate a technology strategy. But the world has changed rapidly. Conflicts are documented on mobile phone, hate speech spread in seconds across digital platforms, evidence is stored in the cloud, artificial intelligence now shape information, flood, and decision-making processes. Technology is no longer peripheral to justice, it's embedded within it. Recognizing this transformation, the Transitional Justice Unit has developed the 2025 to 2028 roadmap with technology positioned as a strategic pillar. This is not simply an administrative adjustment, it is a deliberate shift in how we conceptualize the future of transitional justice in our continent. We are committed to ensuring that technological innovation strengthens, not witness the foundational principle of transitional justice, accountability, transparency, inclusivity, and local ownership. The new roadmap integrates digital tools, secure data systems, artificial intelligence research, and virtual engagement platform into the implementation of the AUTGP. But let me be clear, our embrace of technology is guided by caution as much as by ambition. Innovation must be ethical. Data must be protected. Community must not be excluded by digital divided. In practical terms, we will focus on three priority areas. First, capacity building. We will equip transitional justice practitioners, member state, and civil society actors with the skills to use technology responsibly, whether for documentation of violence, violation, digital archiving, online dialogue platform, or countering hate speech and disinformation. Second, research and innovation. We will support rigorous research into the integration of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies in transitional justice processes, ensuring that Africa shapes these tools rather than simply adapting to external models. Third, technical support to member states. We will provide expertise, training, and advisory services to countries seeking to incorporate technological solutions into their transitional justice frameworks while uploading African Union standards and values. The report we launched today speaks directly to this agenda. It provides analysis, guidance, and reflection at a time when our continent must take ownership of how technology intersects with justice. Africa has long been a site of innovation in transitional justice, from truth commissions to hybrid courts to community-based mechanisms. The next frontier is digital transformation. The question before us is not whether technology will shape transitional justice. It already does. The real question is whether we will shape it deliberately, ethically, and strategically. As I conclude, I wish to congratulate Mr. Andrew Songa for this excellent and forward-looking report. I encourage all of stakeholders here to engage deeply with its findings and to translate its recommendation into action. Let us move forward with clarity of purpose. Let us ensure that technology becomes a tool for healing, accountability, and institutional reform, not division or exclusion. And let us continue to build a transitional justice architecture in Africa that is innovative, principled, and responsive to the need of our people. I thank you, and I wish all of a successful and inspiring launching event.
Thank you so much, Prof, for those important insights on the role of technology in transitional justice, especially from the AU perspective. We will now turn to the substantive presentation of the report. As you will hear, the study does three things. It firstly maps the AU's normative frameworks on TJ and technology. It draws comparative lessons from African and global experiences, and it offers targeted recommendations to ensure that technology strengthens rather than distorts transitional justice outcomes. It is my pleasure to invite Mr. Andrew Songa, the lead author of the report, to present the key findings. Thank you, Mr. Songa.
Thank you very much, Kathian. And standing on existing protocols, good morning or indeed good afternoon to everyone, depending on where it is you are tuning in from. It gives me esteemed pleasure to have the opportunity to take us through the key findings and recommendations of this report on technology and transitional justice in Africa. And before I proceed, I would just request the organizers to provide me with sharing screen privileges, please. I don't seem to have the privileges to share my screen, and I would want to put up some slides for
Okay,
the
sure. One
presentation.
second. My apologies.
Hi, Mr. Andrew. I did allow you to share your screen. I don't know if it has appeared on your bottom screen.
Can you see my screen now? Because it allowed me to share from my end.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. So as has been suggested, my task is to provide an insight into the key findings and recommendations of the report in the hope that we can then be able to kickstart a long-standing conversation and maybe inspire some different perspectives on the idea of where to locate technology within the mandate of transitional justice in a manner that augments rather than diminishes the potential of our contribution as stakeholders to this very lofty, ambitious ideal of furthering justice on the continent. Well, the objectives of the study were really threefold. It was to be able to outline the key issues relating to technology and transitional justice on the continent. In addition to teasing out those key issues, it would also relate to being able to assess what the current state of play is when it comes to utilizing technology and within transitional justice processes on the continent. And then based on the issues we were able to identify and the current contextual experiences, be able to then make out a series of key recommendations to a set of stakeholders with the hope that these recommendations would be able to address some of the issues that the speakers in making their opening remarks have already made, which essentially distill into advancing transformative potentials and mitigating potential harms when it comes to utilizing technology in this context. To do this work, we adopted a methodology of a mixed method approach. The primary aspect being a comprehensive desk review of relevant normative instruments from within the African Union system, but then also looking through a variety of reports or commentaries from transitional justice mechanisms on the continent, and then also relevant academic literature from the field. Once that was done, a draft report was generated, and that was subjected to a validation by the consortium members for the Initiative of Transitional Justice in Africa, whose much needed contemporary experiences were able to enrich some of the findings, as well as the recommendations that I will highlight. In terms of structuring the research, we have 6 core aspects of the report. The introduction, which largely addresses the objectives and the methodological approach to the study. The first substantive section would be that which locates technology and transitional justice as key priorities in realizing Africa's Agenda 2063 as articulated by the African Union, which in its essence is about realizing a peaceful, stable, and sustainable development. And we will see that justice and technology are key pillars for that endeavor. And then we moved on to analyzing contemporary experiences from around the world, because we are not the only ones grappling with this question of technology and transitional justice. It is, in fact, something that is evolving for all of us as a common community, because, as I believe Tafadzwa had raised, technology has profoundly changed the dynamics of how it is we relate with each other in society. And then it is on that basis of locating the global discourse that we then center the African experiences of technology within transitional justice processes. And from there, we are able to then build on those experiences and lessons by looking a bit wider and recognizing that also beyond the field of justice, democratic governance and public service delivery spaces also offer much needed lessons and insights about the journey that technology can take into the field of transitional justice. And then finally, a conclusion and set of recommendations aimed at a variety of stakeholders. So on to some of the key findings that I will endeavor to highlight. And this is not going to be exhaustive, obviously, because of the time constraints. We will highlight some of the major findings within the report. When it comes to looking at technology and transitional justice as priorities in defining the continent's future, I think one key finding from the study is we are well located in terms of articulating normative guidance when it comes to transitional justice and when it comes to technology. There is a litany of instruments already in play that gives a bit of a foundation from which to venture into this question. So obviously, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy becomes one of the primary documents, not only defining transitional justice or possible processes that can be undertaken by states, but as I will highlight, also providing key principles that can be very instructive in guiding how technology can then figure into transitional justice. When it comes to technology itself, again, there's a lot of normative guidance that our member states through the African Union have already begun to invest in, recognizing both the potential and pitfalls of technology. I think some of the primary flagship instruments would include the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. But then you also have policy guidance through things like the 10-year digital transformation strategy, and as well when it comes to looking at the human rights impact, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights investing in a study on the ramifications of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies on human and people's rights generally. So these are just a snapshot of some of the instruments, but it is to emphasize that we do have a lot of normative investment that has already taken place in trying to define and conceive where both transitional justice and technology can take the continent. As Professor Bakama had highlighted in his opening remarks, indeed, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy does not explicitly speak to technology per se, but then you will find that through its principles, it does provide the broad-based guidance that can address some of the concerns that I believe I had Anna mention, that I had Tafadzwa mention as well in their opening remarks. That is the fact that we have principles that are supposed to anchor transitional justice processes in a manner that amplifies and elevates the rights and interests of victims and survivors, as well as ensuring the effective participation of society at large. And it's through this prism that we must then begin to assess the viability and the value of technology in transitional justice. And some of those principles I have listed there include the notion of inclusiveness, equity, non-discrimination, context specificity to ensure that when we deploy technology, it is in fact appropriate for the context within which we are trying to utilize it, ensuring cooperation and coherence, and then also enabling capacity building for sustainable endeavors or initiatives that can benefit from technology. But even as you have this broad-based guidance through the principles articulated from the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, what is in fact needed is a more concerted effort to link what is being developed in terms of the benchmarks for the use of technology and also the expectations and requirements that the policy articulates for effective transitional justice processes. And as Professor Bakama suggested in his opening remarks, this is why the implementation roadmap of the transitional justice policy becomes essential, because it then provides an opportunity for that coherence being generated. And as he had mentioned, making technology a strategic pillar within the 2025 to 2029 policy implementation roadmap becomes a very good way of doing that, because then it allows for greater focus in terms of incorporating what the guidance, incorporating the normative guidance that can come from some of the instruments I've mentioned previously, can then be brought to bear with regards to engaging with stakeholders and also in the implementation of transitional justice processes specifically. So what is the unfolding experience of the use of technology in transitional justice when you look at it from existing literature and the unfolding experiences around us? There are a couple of key lessons that I think are very instructive, even before we venture into the African question. The fact is, as I believe Anna had started in her remarks, there is a dual role for technology when it comes to transitional justice, both positive and negative impacts. And that is to say, on the one hand, technology has elevated the manner in which the atrocities transitional justice is concerned about can be committed. We've seen the entry of new and sophisticated aspects of weaponry, for example, in conflict. We have also seen the elevation of existing concerns, such as propagation of hate speech, incitement, propaganda, being really accelerated through the use of technological platforms, particularly such as social media platforms. And so the atrocities and the violations that we are concerned about within the realms of transitional justice are in fact being amplified and accelerated by technology. And so that also creates a new wave of concerns in terms of the tools we therefore then have to be able to effectively address these atrocities and violations. But then again, at the same time, as much as the perpetration of harmful acts has increased, so has the ability to then also investigate, monitor, and document these violations and atrocities. Because again, as we shall see, there are quite a number of technological tools that have then also arisen that have empowered actors such as civil society, victims and survivors themselves, to be able to then equip themselves with the ability to effectively generate more evidence and also effectively tell their own stories and hopefully attract the kind of responsive redress mechanisms that would be then required to realize the goals and ambitions of transitional justice. And in that sense, it brings me to the second aspect from the experiences that have been documented, is we have seen innovation to be able to overcome some of the obstacles that could have easily hindered the potential of transitional justice processes. And a key example of this was during the COVID-19 lockdown era, when the pandemic saw everything come to a standstill. There are significant examples of transitional justice processes that effectively moved online and tried to proceed by using digital tools that could see people still interact and engage without having to be in the same room or to have to engage in person. And even in the aftermath of COVID-19, we've seen some of these tools still being used and sustained. I think particularly even as we are having this online launch, this kind of format has been something that has now been ingrained as part and parcel of outreach and engagement with different stakeholders. But then we've also seen tools such as digital archives being used to expand the reach and engagement that the public can have with various memorialization efforts. And I believe later in the discussion, we will see tangible examples of that from some of our presenters. And then, as I mentioned in relation to artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, we are at a stage where we are seeing, again, significant advancements through what it is artificial intelligence can do for the justice question. We have seen improvements and advancements in how investigations can be conducted, and in fact, even expanding the arena of who, in fact, can engage in the documentation and investigation of human rights violations and related atrocities that would be the concern of transitional justice processes. There are very good examples that have been cited in the report, such as in the case of Syria, where open source investigations have been amplified by the ability of using artificial intelligence tools to do mass analysis of satellite images, as well as social media inputs and contributions from the citizens to be able to create a picture of conflict and to be able to track down certain incidences and illuminate much needed evidence to ensure accountability. So what are we saying in summation with regards to this intertwining of technology and transitional justice? I think the emphasis is that we have both transformative potential and concerning harms that can come with this strong feature of technology within transitional justice. That we can utilize technological tools to broaden inclusion of different actors, that we can use technology to increase the ownership that victims and survivors can have in processes because they can, if properly empowered, directly input and shape transitional justice processes. They can also improve how we implement transitional justice processes and how we evaluate their effectiveness. Because through, aspects such as developing technological analytical tools, we can be able to interpret mass sets of data and be able to have more distilled information with regards to how things are progressing and proceeding. I think one of the easiest or low-hanging fruits that already exists with the use of technology has been how you can expand the potential for outreach and education of the public, particularly with regards to understanding dynamics of conflict, understanding transitional justice processes as they unfold, and also being able to have a repository that people can always come back to when it comes to talking about digital archives, for example. But then when it comes to harms, we have to then be able to establish very critical and much needed ethical and philosophical guidelines that can address the challenges that we've already highlighted, like exclusion and marginalization. We must have those underlying principles, like I mentioned, from the transitional justice policy that look to ensure that anytime the deployment of technology is done, it is done in a way that has a net positive and not net negative to the most critical actors in the process, being victims and survivors. But that then, even as you develop tools for the benefit of victims and survivors, it should not be a top-down approach. It should rather be one that emphasizes co-creation in order to make sure that any innovations are developed with the ideal objective of being responsive to the actual contextual needs of the people that they are meant to serve. And so it's on that basis that we can then look at the use of technology and transitional justice processes on the continent. And there are quite a series of examples that, again, I can't be exhaustive with in this presentation. But if you then look at the history of how transitional justice processes have unfolded in Africa, you will be able to see some varieties of innovative and useful examples of technology within some of these processes. And so I will just seek to highlight a few. Again, I emphasize as a snapshot, but please, as you go through the report, you will see a much more exhaustive discussion on some of these examples, and in fact, see more examples provided. In truth seeking, I think one of the strongest features of technology being used is with regards to establishing both pathways for increased public participation, as well as digital archives to enrich the aspect of referring back to Truth Commission processes. And so you will see, for example, in South Africa, quite a bit of investment was made in utilizing the existing videos and footages from the Truth Commission into developing digital archives, online databases, and to some extent, interactive websites that could continue the objective of educating successive generations in the country with regards to what the Truth Commission process was about, what its outcomes were about, and how it could then possibly continue to inform contemporary debates and discourses on some of the challenges that the country continues to face to this day. So you will see, for example, that there were efforts between the South African Broadcasting Corporation, the organization SAHA that focuses on historical archives, in being able to generate online platforms that could enable the citizenry and indeed the continent at large to continue to make reference to the hearings, deliberations, and key documentary outcomes of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission process. In the Gambia, the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission continued to also utilize digital online platforms such as YouTube and Facebook to expand the reach of their hearings to the wider public. So in addition to the people who had the privilege and opportunity to attend their hearings in person, you would then also have live streaming of these hearings on these platforms to enable more engagement and interaction between the Commission's processes and the public. Going back to Liberia, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had a very interesting approach of establishing what they called mobile story exchange systems, MOSES, where they would set up computers strategically within different parts of their communities and invite those communities to record and document some of their stories and their insights, and then also get to watch what other communities have recorded and documented in a way of then expanding the dialogue and the discourse around their transitional justice process. When it comes to justice and accountability, we are seeing more and more use of technology to also again expand the reach of criminal accountability proceedings, as well as also being able to enhance the investigatory and evidence gathering aspects of this component. So just to give a quick example, when it comes to the International Criminal Court that have invested quite a bit in this respect, in the Dominic Ongwen case, as a way of expanding the engagement and participation of victims with regards to that question, you had, and also to safeguard witnesses, you had situations and scenarios where witnesses were allowed to appear online and provide evidence online in a way that also was able to protect some of these witnesses, but then also cut costs with regards to what it would have taken for the court to be able to facilitate in-person oral evidence testimony in those cases. But then even beyond that, they are leading the pack in trying to invest in other aspects of using technological tools to enhance the investigatory and evidence collection processes I've just highlighted, through, for example, using artificial intelligence for receiving and analyzing submissions that are made for potential country situations, or to be able to also collate and organize evidence, to be able to review that evidence and analyze it, and also to have an online cloud-based evidence storage system. When it comes to memorialization, again, there are quite a number of examples one could look to. The fact that there's greater investment being made in virtual elements of memorials in order to, again, globalize the access to these memorials, and to be able to also facilitate the aspect of memorialization, where maybe for one reason or another, such as the lack of political will, the prospects of having an in-person memorialization effort is inhibited. So you can have, for example, the Gambian experience, where the African Network Against Extrajudicial Killings and Enforced Disappearances engaged in both an in-person and virtual exhibition for their duty to remember memorial effort, but I will let a subsequent speaker elaborate on that experience. And the African Union is in fact also embarking on a similar exercise through an African Human Rights Memorial that seeks to both have an in-person and virtual experience for the continent's citizenry to be able to engage with certain aspects of the continent's past. And some of that past will include the experiences of key transitional justice movements, such as the Rwandan genocide, and I believe also the South African experience. Then when it comes to the aspect of restitution and compensation, the study managed to uncover very innovative exercises undertaken by certain victims and survivor groups, where they utilized technology to try and elevate their claims for reparations. Particularly in Kenya, the Endorois community, which successfully adjudicated the reclamation of its ancestral land rights at the African Human Rights System level with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, they moved on to also develop a 3D map of what should constitute their ancestral lands, so that they could make it a basis for their claim of restitution, both in relation to their pursuit of reparations under the African Human Rights System, but then also eventually under Kenya's Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. The other element that also I wanted to highlight in this conversation was the potential of mobile money platforms in facilitating, in a very fast manner, compensations to victims in distress and in need of immediate support. And this emerged from Kenya's experience with the post-election violence in 2007, 2008, where its mobile money platform, M-Pesa, proved to be an instructive and useful tool in facilitating the dispersal of money to displaced victims in order to enable them to then attend to immediate humanitarian needs, and be able to then, just take matters into their own hands once certain civil society organizations were able to give them the funds to quickly go and procure much needed basic goods and basic needs. When it comes to rehabilitation, again, we have seen the possibilities that technology can present to then facilitate and provide much needed support to victims and survivors in situations where in-person gatherings are inhibited or limited. And again, the COVID-19 pandemic provided a good backdrop and example for this. When through, for example, the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation's Trauma Clinic, they managed to innovatively take up teletherapy as an option to provide trauma and counseling services to um, victims and survivors as a way of overcoming the restrictions that emerged with the COVID-19 pandemic. Beyond looking at some of the snapshots of these examples within conflict contexts or within transitional justice processes, there are lessons moving forward that we can also take from wider spaces such as democratic governance processes, as well as the notion of public service delivery by our governments. And so in that sense, I just wanted to highlight two quick elements, and that is what we've come to know as e-governance, which is really about government services going online. I think as we move across the continent, more and more of our countries are embarking on situations that see much needed government services being facilitated through online platforms. And these have included, for example, aspects such as acquiring citizenship documents, being able to pay for some of these government-related services, the notions of telemedicine, the prospects of e-learning through digital classrooms, and also being able to facilitate procurement for government through some of these online platforms. And so one would think that if governments are already attuned to using some of these online portals and platforms to deliver public services, in the context of transitional justice, you could therefore begin to expect and foresee the use or this similar approaches to e-governance within transitional justice processes. So you could imagine, for example, government creating platforms that are able to effectively document victims and survivors for the purposes of reparation programs. You can be able to see governments, for example, being able to set up digital platforms that can track finances and other forms of funding that are dispersed for utility in the interest of victims and survivors. But then also outside government is what we as citizens and civil society do, and that is the development of civic technology tools, tools that are aimed to empower citizenry to engage with governance processes or empower them to also scrutinize and hold government actors and other policy holders accountable. And there are quite a number of examples of some of these tools that have been generated by civil society and individual activists. Some of these tools have, in fact, been incorporated and supported by the African Union itself through the African Union Civic Tech Fund. And what this fund essentially tries to do is to support youth-led innovations that can strengthen citizen engagement through the use of data and digital technologies. So if already there's spaces being generated to harness youth innovation and youth engagement through technological platforms, one would hope and foresee that similar support could extend into the kind of innovations that either citizens themselves or civil society are trying to facilitate to enhance transitional justice processes and experiences. And it's on that basis that I will now quickly come to some of the key recommendations that the report then makes to a variety of stakeholders. And so when it comes to the African Union, I think the overarching theme in terms of the recommendations is that we would hope the African Union can provide leadership on the question of technology and transitional justice. Leadership in the sense that it could therefore be able to guide member states on reconciling the obligations that exist with regards to the proper and rights-based approach to using technology and the use of technology within transitional justice. And so we recommend, for example, a guidance note to member states that links the principles of the African Transitional Justice Policy with those of other normative instruments around technology, such as the Digital Transformation Strategy or the Malabo Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. Key elements of this guidance would include emphasizing data protection, cybersecurity, rights-based approaches to how technology is deployed, and also providing regulation, but the kind of regulation that ensures ethical use of technology and ethical innovative approaches, but not regulation that excessively or unduly stifles innovation. Then the next recommendation for the African Union would be to broaden digital engagement strategies and related technologies within the roadmap for the implementation of the transitional justice policy. And I'm happy to note, as Professor Pakama had said, this is clearly an ongoing concern for the African Union by way of the implementation roadmap of 2025 to 2029. But to be a bit more granular, this broadening would include the incorporation of technological tools, such as massive open online courses, digital repositories and databases, perhaps digital dashboards that can track the implementation of transitional justice processes. And I would note some countries are already embarking on this kind of approach, such as the Gambia. And then also digital platforms and engagement hubs that would allow, a feedback loop between citizens, transitional justice processes, or in fact, governments, when it comes to being able to ascertain whether in fact transitional justice processes are being responsive or whether they are in fact marginalizing and excluding segments of the population. Then, of course, importantly, as part of the technical support that the African Union provides to member states when it comes to transitional justice processes, part of them being alive to the reality of technology would be to similarly provide technical support to some of those states or transitional justice mechanisms that would be looking to infuse technology into their strategies of implementation. To member states, the main theme of the recommendation would be compliance. That we would be calling on member states to commit to adhering to the principles of the transitional justice policy as the ethical guideline and roadmap to ensuring the proper use of technology, but that also goes hand in hand with the obligations they have under the relevant norms that govern the use of technology, whether in public service delivery or ensuring a rights-based approach to the use of technology generally. Then there's also the recommendation that they implement policies and commit resources to ensure that their approach to digital transformation and innovation does in fact create an enabling environment that leads to equitable and inclusive societies. So this is just to specifically acknowledge the fact that the use of technology in transitional justice is going to be heavily contextual. And we do recognize that on our continent, the prospects of technology use is not uniform or at an equilibrium. The reality is, for example, internet penetration is low. And when you factor in the rural and urban divide, that creates even a bigger gap. There's also a different reality when it comes to the demography, when you think about it from a gendered perspective, what the experience is for women versus what the experience is for men. And therefore, even as you embrace digital transformation and innovation generally, as well as within transitional justice processes, it is important to ensure that they are responsive to the contextual realities on the ground. And this especially therefore means that you commit the necessary financial resources to meet people at their point of need. Then, very closely related to that is ensuring that you have the right kind of budgets as member states to support this kind of endeavor towards digital transformation, and that also you commit to building the infrastructure that can improve the experience and access for citizenry. Then the other aspect to compliance would also involve a commitment to allowing civic technology and digital civic space to thrive. That you would not only commit to not to interfere with digital civic space, you will also, as member states, support civic tech innovations to enhance the prospects of citizen engagement with transitional justice processes. And so this would therefore mean seeing more of initiatives that are modeled akin to the AU Civic Tech Fund, perhaps by expanding the prospects of the Civic Tech Fund to even have a specific line to supporting technology initiatives that enrich transitional justice processes, but also seeing states own the idea of supporting civic tech innovations at the national level. When it comes to civil society, the recommendations are really about how they can innovate and that innovation empowers those that they seek to serve. And that means developing civic tech innovations for transitional justice that emphasize co-creation with the very communities they are supposed to benefit, and that these tools are customized to also then adapt to infrastructural realities on the ground. This means developing tools that are then therefore easily accessible and easily understood and easy to use for the communities that are the intended beneficiaries. And so that therefore means it needs to also be attached to a very strong evaluatory process that continuously asks the question of whether the tools in themselves are enriching the experience for victims and survivors by responding to their pressing needs. And if they're not, ensuring that they are appropriately reconfigured to meet those needs. Recalling the fact that technology will never be a tool to supplant the more traditional approaches to engagement with transitional justice processes, but rather they should work to complement and augment some of these existing processes. In order to then make sure that the innovations that are created are useful and sustainable, we would also recommend that civil society and individual innovators maximize on limited resources through collaboration, that they avoid duplication of efforts by developing similar tools where in fact you could have easily worked to enrich existing tools to serve multiple diverse needs. And one key element or approach to doing this would be to develop open source tools that can allow other successive users or other successive innovators to come in and either modify some of these tools for their own contexts or to add certain elements and expand the potential use of these tools as they see fit. And finally, when it comes to strategic development and partners, the emphasis or the theme would be one of responsive support. That the support programs that would go into funding technological innovations in transitional justice, whether aimed at state or non-state actors or TJ mechanisms, these support programs should really emphasize a theory of change that requires, again, innovation based on responsiveness and co-creation with the targeted communities. This is, I think, one of the key ways to ensure sustainability and long-term ownership of the technological innovations that are eventually developed. But then, in order to also ensure sustainability, it requires substantive program support that can allow for lasting impact, rather than episodic support that maybe can only support the initial phase of developing a technological tool, but then lack funding to support the full deployment of that tool. And, ad hoc or minimal support of that level can only lead to sunk costs. Because we've seen time and again a lot of innovations that can only reach the stage of proof of concept, but then lack the required support to be able to see its full-fledged deployment so that it can meet its fullest potential. But then, very importantly, I think some of the development partners who, in fact, have planks of engagement with the state, transitional justice mechanisms, as well as civil society, they can really be the bridge between state and non-state actors in a way that then encourages an open government approach to technology and transitional justice. By this, I mean it is through them that we can possibly have the kind of dialogues that are required to safeguard digital civic space, to encourage broader investment in civic technology, and to also see states take ownership of some of these initiatives eventually as part of mainstream programs that are aimed at enhancing citizen engagement and public participation in these critical spaces of justice and also democratic governance more broadly. And with that, I hope it provides a worthwhile snapshot of the report, and I hope it does, in fact, invite and catalyze further debates and perspectives of how technology can really be utilized in a day-to-day lived reality on the continent to really contribute to the overall vision and objective of our transitional justice policy, which is really to realize, societies that can overcome their pasts on the basis of transformation that then anchors, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. So over to you, Kathian, and again, my appreciation for the opportunity to take us through the report.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that clear and thought-provoking presentation. We will now move on to our reflections panel, where we will unpack the policy and practice implications of the report. I will introduce our panelists before I hand over to our first panelist. Firstly, Ms. Fiona Asuke, the Program Manager of Transformative Peace in Africa, Open Society Foundations, and then Mr. Usani Odom, Project Officer, Initiative for TJ in Africa at the African Union Commission, along with Ms. Sion Haile Mariam, the Program Officer coordinating the AU Human Rights Memorial Project at the African Union Commission. And then finally, Ms. Sira Ndo, the Country Director for ANECED, the Gambia. I will now hand over to Ms. Asuke. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks, Andrew, for the presentation with very solid recommendations. One of the areas of work we've been thinking of building at the Open Society Foundation is thinking through the role innovation continues to play in conflict transformation. So I'm particularly excited to be part of this assessment and thought-provoking sense on the role of tech and transitional justice. I think this report comes at a really important moment because it feels like it's a race between the pace at which technological advancements are evolving and affecting each and every sphere of life. You mentioned public participation, justice, health, education. The examples are rife across, and in particularly the growing role in peace, security, justice, and accountability. It leaves a lot to be seen. And this can be seen even looking at different ways governments and states are posturing and some of the policy positions they've been taking, for example, on AI, following the big summit over the past couple of weeks. Kenya, alongside India and Italy, are now adopting a sovereign AI pathways framework for Africa. Rwanda is partnering on, health, education, innovation, and digital economies in ASEA. So the context is really right in terms of lots of innovations and how that is shaping life as it is. And previous speakers have been very clear on that. And while tech innovations have historically contributed, especially to post-conflict accountability, as was enumerated in some of the report findings, these frameworks, as Prof was mentioning, were not really designed for an era where there is as much acceleration. And so for me, the core implications of this report and of the reality is that technology is no longer just a tool that's supporting transitional justice, but it is really part of the ecosystem, the governance and operating ecosystem in which injustice is happening, conflicts, but also the space in which justice is being renegotiated. And that is really shifting the stakes and how we're looking at tech for good, tech for justice, and tech for societies as well. I'll refer over the next course of the 5 minutes of my intervention on 3 core roles on what technology represents. Technology represents power based on who is funding, whose ecosystems they are built for, who sets the formulas, who sets the algorithms. And this helps answers questions like whose peace, whose justice are we really trying to advance? So technology represents power, but technology also represents priorities because choosing one form of innovation to develop over another, looking at systems that are focusing on prediction and preempting over one that is tracking, analyzing, and performing its choices. And therefore, it's different priorities. But lastly, if there's power and priorities, then technology really represents politics. Politics around choices, politics of the day around various actors and interests. So spoilers and allies alike, everyone is looking at one thing. And that has been spoken to by the various speakers, politics of exclusion, marginalization, or the latter. And over the last decade, the AU TJP that is really grounded in accountability, structural reform, guarantees of non-recurrence, etc., has provided a very beautiful framework to support accountability and justice. And on the other hand, the AU has also thought through what are some of the continental normative frameworks that are very strong that it would take to have digital transformation. And innovation and technology in particular have been highlighted within those frameworks as a transformative lens and recognized as enablers that would contribute to achieving inclusive, sustainable societies in a sense. So, these two moments exist in a parallel. And, as I began by saying, it feels like there is a race between the advancements and the society within which these advancements are created for. And I think that also then creates the opportunity on how to bring together, helping us answer questions around ambition and capacity. What does non-recurrence mean in an era of unchecked digital surveillance systems, of AI, deepfakes? And this is a reality for most of our states where while there's great ambition in thinking through the role that tech, innovations, AI would promise for efficiency, for public sector good, this ambition is not really matched around by capacities on funding, by capacities on building and ownership and agency of these very platforms. It's very much built on infrastructures that are not locally owned. And what then does that bring in? We're saying it represents power. Where power lies, that shifts quite a number of dynamics. And so really moving that tech is no longer just a supporting bit of the infrastructure on TJ, but it is part of the architecture itself. And we've seen the gains. I'll not elaborate on that. Andrew has mentioned, as well as the risks. But on the risks, just to double down beautifully, as was explained, that TJ gives policies to deal with some of the risks, and particularly on exclusion, and to just a call to be mindful around how do we digitize, how do we innovate, adapt using technology without really deepening exclusion, mistrust, insecurity, because really the digital divide in this day and age can honestly become just another frontier of the justice divide, and efficiency that is always an argument for technology should never really come at the cost of inclusivity. Transitional justice, as has been mentioned, and we began by saying, has looked at traditional dealt with identifiable perpetrators, non-chains of command that can be tracked down if you're looking at accountability, evidence collection. But what really happens when harm and conflicts are channeled through algorithms, faceless drones, disinformation campaigns that are really, really complex. And this realization, I think, for me, is really that, looking at justice and accountability in that space where harm is really algorithmic, accountability becomes much more complex. And that is a call in terms of thinking through how do we not shift the frontiers and faces and fronts for modernizing of repression? How do we contribute to that, to the technology space as it is, moving along with the justice and accountability mechanisms that are really wholesome, and have covered this in several ways, as was highlighted, to build on to that. And I'm not saying this really in a way to alarm, but in a way to think through preparedness, that tech represents power, and power has continuously evolved. And the models then in which we look through the quest for justice, for peace and accountability must evolve with it. The AU-TJP speaks very powerfully around transformation. And in 2026, my sense is this transformation will include a lot around governance. The normative frameworks are strong. I think the space is really fluid. There's always going to be need to buffer those up. There is a global coordination. There seems to be an appetite for that, but the absence of solid systems and leadership, meaning that sectoral coalitions and multi-sector partnerships may in a way surpass this space. So the question is, how then, what are the guardrails to engage within this? A chance to think through ethical governance of emerging technologies, the implications of the same, etc. Thinking through protection, resilience frameworks for protection, and the like. There's also the question on sovereignty, because there's a lot of structural dependency on infrastructure that is controlled externally, the power question. And there have been developments in countries like Nigeria, the 2025 National Cloud Investment Strategy, where Nigeria is really trying to define the policies around cloud storage, who owns, who controls it, what are the security standards, what are the rules around cloud data and etc. I think there's really a call in this day and age to think through the sovereignty questions, and with that comes dignity and security, the like. One other component to be taken into account is South-South collaboration. Because in context of fragility, a lot of innovations have been made. And I think this gives us an opportunity to think through shared infrastructure for lowered costs, because we are beginning by saying that tech represents priorities, and a lot of the tech that exists now is very capital intensive. So a shared infrastructure could be one of the mechanisms to achieve a shared priorities within cost centers that are spread out. Having a sense of coordinated standards. We spoke about avoiding duplication in different senses of innovation. How do we use what exists to build on, to expand, etc. But it would also give a very critical platform for collective learning. What worked, what didn't work, what are some of the nuances that should be taken into account, even as innovations and tech are built for really context-specific and locally grounded senses. And I'm just about to finish, but just to think through that, transitional justice has always been about reshaping power so that cycles of conflict, violence, and erosion of people and their memories do not repeat themselves. And today, power, as we said, is increasingly exercised through data, through algorithms, through platforms. And this is a reality we must engage directly. One realization we've been making in terms of thinking through a peace ecosystem is that water is disproportionately overfunded. The figures from 2024, 2025 are staggering. About 100 billion in water alone, and peace tech getting innovations budgets of about 10 million. A mere 10%, while all these innovations on water continue to perpetuate the very systems that transitional justice is trying to remedy and get accountability for. There's a need to really think through funding proportionately, not letting peace tech be the underdog in this conversation, but to really also then innovate with intention. In terms of what the needs are. I think also the call is not to be backed down on technology determinism. Tech is not the one-stop solution or the new vehicle to deliver justice, accountability, and peace. To be mindful because the risks have been laid out. This would just help us think through what are the necessary guardrails, ethical frameworks, funding models, agency and ownership stopgaps. What does it take to have capacity for tech that is built for and with the people and not really for them, or imported solutions that are then applied en masse with no control and then inevitably perpetuating the various cycles of conflict. And finally, I like that the report at the end is really clear on that this is a collective agenda. The solution in thinking through tech for governance, for justice, is really not set on one actor per se. The AU has its role. States and governments have their role. Communities have their role. And I dare say that, it would be difficult to have justice experts turn into tech experts, but then we need a coalition of the tech experts themselves, with the justice people, with those that think through finance, trying to unpack war economies, etc., so that it is really a coalition of niche and intertwined expertise that is able to build for the current context, one that is really foresighted, future-proof and forward-thinking, and in able to anticipate what then justice may need or what injustice may mean in the future, looking at all the advancements. So I think I'll end here, and thank you so much, Kath, and everyone who's spoken before. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for that very insightful presentation. I will now hand over to Ms. Sion Hailemariam and Mr. Usani Odam to present their project, the AU project. Thank you, Sion.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy Ann. And a very big thank you to Andrew Songa for that very wonderful and very comprehensive presentation on the intersectionality between transitional justice and technology. I think my presentation is divided between myself and, of course, Sion, who I would very quickly call after a brief introduction to come and demonstrate for us how we at the African Union have been able to actually pursue an element of transitional justice in this regard being memorialization, of course, with technology. Maybe I would open my presentation by re-echoing the words of a very prominent jurist who said about legal precedents that if the law cannot do what has never been done before, then the law will become static while the rest of the society moves on, and that will be bad for both. If you marry this thing to the topic of our conversation today, which is on transitional justice and technology, it simply means if transitional justice does not embrace technology, then TJ will become static while the rest of the society moves on. And this will be bad for both TJ and the society. From the presentation we've heard about the report Andrew made, which was very comprehensive, we have seen how TJ is now beginning to shape, technology is beginning to shape TJ processes even within the continent in the pursuit for peace, the pursuit of justice, accountability, and reconciliation, and the likes. And then we have such things like AI tools, satellite technology, mobile evidence, as was, of course, evidently demonstrated during the Gen Z movement in places like Kenya and other places like South Africa during the Fees Must Fall movement, and in Nigeria during the NSAS movement. All of this indicates that technology is beginning to change the very climate of transitional justice, and that TJ is now being central in not just other aspects of, technology is now being central in not just documenting violations against human rights. We also use it now for verifying evidence, for expanding access to justice, and very importantly, for preserving memory. And we have the specific examples I've mentioned, like remote and real-time documentation. We saw this in the BBC report in Kenya about the killings that took place during those protests. We also see digital memorialization and diaspora engagement, which my colleague Sion is going to speak about. And we also had examples of virtual testimonies and online public participation, where we saw how young people were able to mobilize other young people and citizens across the Gambia to take part in TJ, the Truth and Reconciliation process, through their radios and all of that. What does all of this mean for the African Union transitional justice policy? Songa already laid the foundation, which is the fact that the policy provides the foundation for emerging technologies when it uses such terms like innovativeness, for TJ processes to be innovative, for TJ processes to be context specific. Of course, the context we are now living in is that of AI, technology, and the likes. And that TJ processes must lead to transformativeness. How do we achieve this transformativeness other than moving by the times? I actually wasn't thinking about the recommendations Songa listed out, of course, as were evident in the report which I read, until I actually engaged with them. I was looking at it in the longer term in terms of review of the TJ policy. Of course, we, as a policy being a human endeavor, these are things that are not 100% foolproof. The TJ policy itself is made to be open textured for even future expansion and all of that. But what I am thinking is that the recommendation in this report are very, very important, because they wouldn't then need to wait until we have a review of the AUTJP. Such interventions like guidance note, policy briefs, and such like the review of the roadmap for the implementation, which is currently being printed by the AU, now gives us that opportunity to consider these new developments in technology, in AI, and the innovativeness that the policy talks about. I think with this recommendation, the African Union will be in a better position to engage more adequately with member states, specifically adequately engage with think tanks, with even civil society organizations like CSVR to lead the conversation on how transitional justice can be better deployed in the context of technology and AI. And this is, I think, a mandate which the African Union will be very willing and eager to pursue following such reports like this. But before we will conclude, I will simply yield the floor over to my colleague Tion, who will tell us in practical terms how, from our end, we've been able to use technology in launching the virtual component of the African Union Memorial Project. Ms. Tion, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Osani and Kati. I hope I am audible.
Yes,
And
please.
very good afternoon from these distinguished guest speakers, dear colleagues. I was introduced by Ms. Kati. I coordinate the AU Human Rights Memorial Project within the Transitional Justice Unit, the AUC. And thank you very much for inviting me to join this launch and also briefly speak on the virtual memorial as a technological initiative in the AUTJ setting. So as Usani introduced, the virtual memorial platform was envisioned as a complementary digital extension of the physical memorial. It is established as an online space that preserves memory beyond geographic boundaries. Of course, it's cost-effective and broadly accessible. The platform was established almost before 2 years, but we had a lengthy consultative and approval process for the contents of the virtual exhibition. And luckily, as we speak, we secured political level approval has been secured from the affected member states. I can hear echo, so is that disturbing or it's okay to continue, Katie?
We can hear you okay, thanks, Tion.
All right, thank you. So as it was highlighted on the study and also indicated by Andrew Songa here, the virtual memorial represents the memory beyond the geographic boundaries, and it's a major institutional milestone that we're launching the coming April 7 during the commemoration event. To briefly highlight why the virtual memorial matters, this virtual platform is not simply a website. It is an interactive web-based exhibition. It is a strategic continental instrument designed to first safeguard collective memory and also preserve verified historical narratives, which in close collaboration we are, especially with affected member states, we have collected and uploaded on the system. Also, you can simply agree with me that digital memorialization does more than store information. It shapes how truth is accessed, interpreted, and transmitted to across generations. It constructs public memory. Of course, this creates both opportunity and responsibility. And as it's highlighted on the study itself, it will bring both responsibility and opportunity in the digital era. In this regard, we have made deliberate efforts in the African Union Commission to make the platform engaging, particularly for youth, as Osani highlighted. Especially the design adopts the architectural layout of the physical memorial, but we have tried to make it appealing to the youth, expanding its space and accessibility. So visitors can move virtually from one thematic room to another and interact with various audiovisual materials, immersive contents, and curated historical documentations on the platform. Just to give you a glimpse, because I'm not projecting the platform, for example, for one of the thematic, which is the Rwanda room, it has about 3 separate rooms projecting the colonial legacy, the genocide period, and the aftermath period. These structures mirrors transitional justice sequencing to reflect structural roots, causes, atrocity documentations, and of course, lastly, reconciliation and institutional reform. So initially we planned it for 1 room, but we ended up establishing 3 rooms only for one of the thematic of the Africa Union Human Rights Memorial Program. We have also a guided tour with narrator, interactive flip books, embedded audiovisual media, and layered information demonstrates how technology can deepen engagement without overwhelming users. Of course, we have to consider the ethical digital governance, as a study really flagged out, which is very critical for technological platforms. The virtual memorial platform is being hosted on AU servers to ensure institutional control and also enhance security standards. The virtual memorial also established as a complement initiative and not fully replace the physical community-based memorialization that we are still putting effort to operationalize within the Africa Union Commission, and we have completed the memorial garden as we speak. And that's why we also try to focus on inclusivity when we established this platform. So multilingual accessibility and to inclusive various narrations, including survivor-centered design, was at the center of the platform. Since we are presenting for 2 and we consumed already our 5 minutes, just to conclude, the Africa Union Virtual Memorial Platform stands at the intersection of finding questions such as how do we remember responsibly in the digital age, and how do we govern memory ethically online. And the study captured on its recommendation clearly, if guided by strong safeguards and principled digital governance, this virtual platform can become a safeguard against denialism and a bridge between transitional justice and Africa's digital future. Thank you, and back to you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Usani and Sion, for sharing about that exciting project. I'll now hand over to Ms. Sindo, Country Director of ANAKED, the Gambia. Ms. Sindo, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to really share a reflection on this really important launch of the report. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I would like to congratulate the partners and all who contributed in really bringing this report to life as well. So speaking from the Gambia context, and of course, perspective of ANAKED, a victim-led civil society organization, I want to begin by saying that for victims, transitional justice is about truth, accountability, dignity, and ensuring non-recurrence. In the Gambia's TRRC, that's the Truth Reconciliation Operations Commission, they created a holistic space for victims to be heard. But the real challenge now is sustaining that momentum. How do we keep the momentum going and really through the transitional justice process and for posterity? How do we ensure that those voices are not lost or changed? How can we amplify these voices? Technology, as we have seen from other presenters, is now beginning to offer practical answers. As another example, I would like to add to the Truth Commission's use of technology that was highlighted by Andrew, is that the Truth Commission in the Gambia also used technology to make it to make the witnesses be able to access the platform, to make their testimonies. Technology was used also to anonymize witnesses by distorting their voices, which was really critical in protecting victims from backlash and stigma, particularly victims of sexual and gender-based violence in the Gambia. Secondly, also on access to justice and accountability, our National Human Rights Commission in the Gambia has also introduced an online platform to file a complaint system, which is making it easier for victims to report violence, and particularly anonymously. In addition, the National Human Rights Commission, which has been mandated, charged with the responsibility to track the implementation of the Gambia government's white paper on the TRRC recommendations. They have a powerful example of how technology can support ongoing accountability, not just the truth-telling process, but allowing citizens and civil society to monitor where the commitments are being actually fulfilled by the government. So the platform provides updates on the status of the implementation of the TRRC recommendation as we are going on a quarterly basis. Not necessarily related to transitional justice, but we are also seeing relevant innovation in civic participation tools such as Marble. Marble is a platform for monitoring elections, which has been used by citizens to report. And we also have a budget dashboard, which provides visual and interactive analysis of government budgets to enhance transparency done by a civil society organization, Gambia Participates, that works on anti-corruption, preserving the sanctity of the voting process, and promoting fiscal responsibility. This demonstrates something very important, that technology can empower citizens to actively engage in governance and oversight, principles that are equally essential for transitional justice. Now, from the perspective of ANACED, as mentioned in the report already, and also by Andrew, ANACED itself has taken steps through its virtual exhibition platform, the Digital to Remember, which documents victim stories and experiences in a digital accessible format. This was also born during the COVID-19 pandemic and shows really how technology not only amplifies victims' voices beyond borders, but how it can preserve memory beyond the lifespan of the commission, making it accessible to future generations and future accountability processes. With the advent of AI, this platform has a huge potential to be transformed into an ecosystem that supports a multi-layer platform for interactive exhibitions, searchable digital archives, learning hubs, and living memory where young people, communities, and diaspora can continue to contribute to the memory archives, as well as network to link digital libraries, schools, juvenile rehabilitation centers in the Gambia and beyond. And this is also an opportunity to see how this can be connected to the AU's digital memorial platform as well. However, we must be cautious, really. Victim data is highly sensitive. If digital tools are not properly designed, they can expose survivors to harm, exclusion, or surveillance, as has been alluded on the double-sided coin, as one of the double-sided issues when it comes to technology, as an enabler, but also as a tool that can be used for oppression and repression. So for ANACED, the principle is really clear. Technology must be victim-centered and grounded on the do no harm principles. This means ensuring data protection, data ownership, informed consent, and survival agency. Bridging the digital divide in transitional justice so that digital justice does not really become elite justice. Co-designing bottom-up inclusive tools that work to address the existing barriers, such as adapting to local languages and accessible for persons with disabilities. This is particularly important for persons who are visually impaired. And also addressing how to reach those who are offline, not just those who are connected to the internet. Finally, this conversation is about more than justice or technology. It is about transforming communities and building inclusive and sustainable societies, because where technology strengthens because when technology strengthens accountability, participation, and trust, it helps prevent the recurrence of violence. To conclude, the TRRC gave victims a voice in the Gambia. Initiatives like the Duty to Remember ensure that those voices endure, and digital tools today give us the opportunity to turn truth into sustained accountability, but only if we keep victims at the center of every solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very victim-centric focus of your presentation. I will now continue with some Q&A, and if I may ask in the interest of time, I'm going to read out the questions now and then hand over to all the speakers to end their closing remarks, to kindly answer the questions and then close off for the day before we formally launch. Yes? Hi?
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in, maybe in the interest of time. I had actually documented some of the questions. By my count, I have 4 questions, 2 from the Q&A and 2 from the chat, that I would be happy to just canvass already and begin to engage.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So then I will hand over to Andrew to close and answer those questions, and then I will hand over to the panelists to briefly close as well. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Kathy Ann, and thank you all for the engagements and the questions that have come in. I do think they are quite illuminating and thought-provoking. I will start with Gugu's question from the Q&A section, which essentially asks, in contexts where states were themselves responsible for past abuses, how do we ensure that digital tools and TJ do not become instruments of renewed control or psychological harm? I think there are 2 answers to this from my perspective. The first one has to be that yes, in the context as you've described, you can easily have those tools instrumentalized to then further harm victims. But like we had suggested with the principles enumerated earlier, technology would have to be grafted onto a plane of certain existing principles for transitional justice to be effectively carried out. And I think one of those 2 key principles is you would want an operational environment that emphasizes independence of transitional justice mechanisms. For example, citizen-led oversight for transitional justice processes. And so the prerequisite for involving the use of technology in transitional justice processes must equally rest on the adherence to those principles. And therefore, the obligation for the state, just as we would require it in any other ordinary transitional justice process to ensure independence, transparency, and accountability, so would it be expected of any technology tool that is deployed within that process. But then additionally, as a way of reinsurance and underwriting the process with those principles for transparency, independence, and oversight, this is also why it also becomes important and the space of involvement of stakeholders. And so technology, again, allows for, as we mentioned in the report, co-creation and innovation from outside state structures. And that, for me, would also be the exciting thing about technological tools in transitional justice, that the state would not have a monopoly on the kind of tools that can be developed and used to enhance the experience for victims and survivors. So for me, also, the reinsurance would be that also we don't have an over-reliance on the state for innovation, that also we have innovative tools that come from outside the state apparatus as a way of reinsurance. Second question related to Geoffrey from the chat, where he essentially asked, how can we use technology to ensure that truth-seeking is prioritized digitally in a sensitive political environment? Again, the prospects that technological innovation introduces is, in some ways, and we've seen examples of this, technology escapes the traditional bounds of control of the state. So in certain contexts, for example, innovations have been hosted and incubated in other states because you allow for continental solidarity when you develop technological platforms. You can have, for example, virtual exhibitions or digital archives that relate to your country but are hosted in a friendly domain, in a friendly country, that then perhaps de-escalates and reduces the risk of interference and harm from state structures. So I would say one of the ways to build on this potential is to work across with other stakeholders, ally with other stakeholders that can then allow you to exploit the spaces that are more safe and conducive, but can then still allow accessibility and reach for the target communities back at home. Then there's a question by Joy that asks, how does the public sector ensure that public interest standards are achieved and protected from private ordering? And this is in relation to the fact, for example, within the realm of AI, the investment is largely private sector driven. I think for me, there's no easy answer to this question, but one of the ways to begin to resolve this is two-pronged. I think this makes a very strong argument when we talked about the state obligation to make investments in infrastructure and very deliberately budget. This makes the case for, I believe, even within the African continent, a stronger investment in our own innovations and also in supporting our own innovators, so that we can also have a stake or a piece of ownership from our own perspective as a continent, instead of being recipients or subjects of innovation, as the case currently is. So I think a part of that answer lies in strong public investment. But then also, secondly, it lies in the equally difficult question of being able to strengthen regulatory frameworks. And I think the reality is this cannot be a singular endeavor of states. It has to be a collective effort. And I think the starting point is to consolidate the viewpoints as the African Union, strengthen the bargaining position, and then argue for stronger global compacts and ethical guidelines that can then be brought to bear on private sector investments within this field. And finally, Fikir asks, in what ways might tech exacerbate the tension between individual and collective dimensions of the right to truth? I think this is one of the clear and present challenges that we are facing in this day and age, in the light of misinformation, disinformation. And the reality is that as much as we have democratized the ability to discourse, the ability to curate, the narratives and truth-seeking efforts through technology, we have also therefore removed or diminished the ability to achieve what some would call a narrative equilibrium, because then everybody is able to harness and create their own narratives and even generate echo chambers that become very hard to penetrate. So I think for me, the biggest risk we have is that these tools, if used in a highly unregulated environment, in an area where there's limited public education and sensitization on things such as misinformation and disinformation, you could easily have the unintended consequence of, rather than enhancing memorialization or enhancing discourse around truth-seeking, you actually then fuel the opposite. You fuel more disinformation, you fuel hate speech in certain contexts, and then ultimately what you have is a disruption of the objective of the right to truth. So I guess the caution there would be to then ensure that even as we innovate, we elevate with capacity enhancement approaches that emphasize, for example, building the right kind of safeguard tools, like tools that can be able to detect misinformation and disinformation, and then being able to, really sensitize the public around those things so that they can be able to discern it for themselves. And then also to really, really continue to sensitize the public around these issues. And I guess this is my opportunity to then make my closing remarks. It's to thank everyone and to hope that this kind of engagement and discourse will only increase as the report is disseminated, and to emphasize again that technology really has to be underpinned by the right kind of ethical guidelines and principles if we really want to realize and achieve the transformative potential that it can present. But that to do that, we must continuously audit our unfolding experiences. And to audit our unfolding experiences requires us generating a community of practice where we continue to share experiences with each other, where we continue to learn from each other and make advancements from the lessons that we are able to generate. Thank you all, and I do hope everyone has an enjoyable rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I would just like to again thank Andrew and Fiona, Tion, Usani, and Sira for the rich presentations and for the rich discussion on technology and TJ. I now invite Anna to formally launch the Technology and Transitional Justice in Africa report. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annie. I'm trying to put my camera. Okay, it is my singular honor to now launch and present to all of us the Technology and TJ in Africa report. We have heard from all our speakers, the author of the report, Andrew Songa, a close friend of the CSVR. We have heard from Ms. Fiona Asuke, one of the biggest funders of transitional justice work on the continent currently, particularly with their transformative Peace in Africa opportunity that they set up as Open Society Foundations. We've heard from my colleagues in the Initiative for Transitional Justice in Africa, from the ICTJ, my colleague Tafatswa, who's also highlighted some of the insights and some of the key findings of the report. Also being funded by the European Union, who's another funder funding some of the work on transitional justice in Africa. We've heard from the African Union, particularly from some of our partners and colleagues, very close friends, Usani Otum, as well as Tion, who have also really spoken about the African Union Human Rights Memorial Project, which also really leverages technology, particularly to ensure that we preserve memory, we keep in our minds what has happened on the African continent in terms of atrocities and historical crimes to foster a never again. We've heard from Prof. Eugene Bakama as well, representing the African Union. One of our closest partners is the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, who's also spoken comprehensively about the work of the African Union around technology and how Agenda 2063 is being furthered by leveraging technological advancements and innovation, making sure that Africa becomes peaceful and that it really leaves no one behind in terms of development, governance, peace, as well as many other processes leading to democracy and a better future for all on the continent. Without much further ado, the report is hereby launched, and my colleagues will upload it on the website, and we will be encouraging all of us to disseminate, to help in the dissemination of this report widen further so that we all benefit and gain something from the report, reference it, cite it, refer to it, make use of it, and let it also really catalyze some of the innovation and some of the betterments and improvements in practice of transitional justice on the African continent and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Anna. I'd like to thank all our speakers, panelists, partners, and participants for contributing to a thoughtful and forward-looking discussion. This report makes clear that technology is already shaping TJ in Africa, and the question is not whether it will be used, but how, by whom, and under what safeguards. On that note, we formally close today's launch. Thank you very much for everyone for joining again, and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.